Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Heartfulness Speaker Series, April edition. It is with immense gratitude that I'm able to introduce today Mr. Nipun Mehta. In his mid-20s, he quit his job and became a full-time volunteer, and over the last 20 years, he has reached millions of people over the globe. Among his many prestigious achievements, President Obama has appointed him on the Council for Social Change. The Dalai Lama has also recognized him as the unsung hero of compassion. But he is most identified for building a community of volunteers, with initiatives like Karma Kitchen, Giftism, Awaken, and Laddership Circles. He's the founder of the company Service Space, which utilizes technology to encourage everyday people around the world to do small acts of service. And their aim is to ignite generosity in everyone. Last summer, Nipun had the opportunity to connect with Heartfulness for the first time during the launch of the Heartfulness Way book. Since then, he has visited the Global Center of Heartfulness in Ghana, Hyderabad, and conducted heartwarming and transformative sessions. We are also honored to have Nipun's mother here with us today. It is especially a privilege to have her here on her birthday. And on behalf of the Heartfulness Institute, we'd like to wish her a very happy birthday. Please accept this on behalf of the Heartfulness Institute. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Mr. Nipun Mehta to the stage.
Thank you. I don't think my voice is going to be as clear as hers, partly because I have a cough and partly because I just don't have that kind of a voice. Thank you. It's a real joy. Now you might hear me. It's a real joy and honor to be here. I have been to the center in Hyderabad, and that was one of All right, I will pretend like I'm a seasoned speaker who will stand behind the podium. Okay, sounds good. So I want to talk a little bit about flow. Yesterday, I was at a gathering at a circle. And this woman comes up to me at the end of the circle, and she says, Nipun, I want to give you something. And I said, oh, wow, what is it that you'd like to give me? She says, I've made some tea, and I've been wondering if you could have a little this much of tea. And I said, I wasn't sure if I wanted tea. This was like at 10 p.m. But she was so sincere and so sweet. So I asked her, why is it that you want to give me tea? She says, well, one of my mentors says you're a hero, and I just thought that I'd like to serve you something, and I don't know what to give you, but I'd like to give you a little bit of tea. And I thought, wow, what a special thing to realize that to appreciate somebody, to acknowledge their sort of goodness, is to be in service to them, is to make a small offering to them. And I'm just very touched by that notion that it is in giving that we create relationships, and it is through those deep relationships of generosity that we give ourselves a chance to wake up to our true nature. And this woman last night taught me that if you are truly grateful for something, give to it. And it doesn't matter, the teacup was this small. It doesn't matter whether it's this small or this big. It's a special thing when we tap into that place in ourselves. And today is fantastic because it's my mom's birthday. My mom, I usually never drag her to my stuff. She's heard me since I was born. So she's like, Nipun, I know that. I said, Mom, you gotta come. It's your birthday. And so I'm really happy that my mom is here as well. So those are the two things that are present in my heart as I share a few reflections this morning. I want to share about this idea of flow. Something that all meditators sort of know, that at some point we're so identified with our physical bodies, and at some point as our awareness deepens, we experience different degrees of dissolution, and there's a kind of internal flow, and then you realize that actually it's not just internal. This is how the world is all around us. Everything is constantly changing. And yet, we are forced into systems and a worldview that is not congruent with that understanding. And so I want to share a little bit from not so much the inner lens, which all of you know a lot about, but more the outer lens of what does it mean to engage with the world on the outside. Not engage with ourselves on the meditation cushion, engage with the world on the outside with this understanding that everything is changing, that everything is actually in flow in every moment. This idea of a static, fixed self is a complete illusion. It just doesn't exist. It doesn't hold up under scrutiny. So as we look up deeper inside, we realize that, wow, there's no static self. There's no fixed self. And that changes everything. It changes how we design the world. It changes how we relate to each other. And I think it ultimately gets you to what that woman who gave me that teacup was saying, that if you to really appreciate something in the moment, you must give to it because it's constantly flowing. I'll get to that. So, flow for me is a state where boundaries start to collapse. Many years ago, I was talking to these kids in the back, and I said, what should I say? And they said, just tell stories. So people like stories. I said, okay, I'll tell a story. So I scrapped my opening. Many years ago, when I was in college, I used to get out of lab very late. One time, I think it was about 3 or 4 a.m. This is at Berkeley. And I was feeling a little groggy, so I said, I'm going to go for a run. And, I go jogging late at night. We have this track, Clark Kerr campus, for those of you that are familiar. They have this beautiful track on the top, and I went running. And at that time, I'm going to date myself, so I had a Walkman, if you can believe that. And I'm running, and I had a great run. On the way back, I was going to my apartment. I had my Walkman, and I had my keys. And all of a sudden, I find myself in a dark alley. And in a distance, I see this one gentleman. And the gentleman looks at me. I look at him. And I'm a little scared. I'd never been mugged in my life at that point. Or even at this point, I haven't been mugged. But I thought, okay, this is the day. This guy is going to assault me. Something bad is going to happen. And I said, first thing you say is what am I going to do? Well, I can run. But I realized that he was probably going to catch me. It was a small alley. I can fight. But, us Gujarati guys, we're not that big, So I said, and anyways, it's not in my nature to fight. So I said, okay, maybe not fight. So what do you do? And I was very scared, and usually I'm inching forward, he's approaching me right there, and I don't know what to do. And I remember thinking, in that moment, because I was so scared, I was not even looking at him in the eye, like sort of like when a teacher calls on you and you don't know the answer, you look down. So I was sort of like, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to ignore this big giant elephant that's right there, but I'm just going to keep going. I tried to do that. But at some point I had this radical thought that, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of losing? You have your keys to the apartment. You have your Walkman. You have your life. You have your body. Why are you so afraid? You're afraid because you want to keep something. And you want to keep something because this person that you think is in front of you is not yours. So the thought that came to my mind was, what if this was your brother? And as soon as I had this thought, like, oh my God, this person is not my enemy. It could be my brother. As soon as I had that thought, it was almost like somebody opened a spigot and everything started to dissolve. And now, instead of feeling this fear, like I had hair, all the hair on my body was standing up. I was like that scared. From that to just complete expansion, as if, oh yeah, you are mine, I'm yours. How can you take from me? Before you even take, it's yours. And so with that audacity, I walked in front of him, and instead of looking down, I'm looking straight at him in the eyes. And instead of being afraid, I look at him and I smile. And what does he do? He smiles back. And maybe nothing was to happen. I don't know. But what I do know is that I went from fear to love. And that boundary started to dissolve between me and the other. And as that boundary started to dissolve, you start to tap into a deeper sense of this flow. And we don't design our world with this kind of a flow. We design our world with a very static view. I own, this is my bank balance, this is my identity. But that's actually just a very superficial convention. So the way I think of it is this. If you look at these kids, they're all giving each other a shoulder rub. But what's curious about this is that when you go to a massage parlor, it's transactional. It's, I do this for you, what are you doing back for me? But here, what they're doing is, I do this for you, you do this for the person in front of you, that person does it for the person in front of them, and ultimately what goes around comes around. This, in business terminology, one might call indirect reciprocity. Not direct, indirect. And I think flow gets us to this. What is this? It's not just that we're exchanging massages, it's that we have each other. We have the circle. But here, what's the opposite, right? You say, well, what's the opposite of flow? The opposite is accumulation. When you accumulate any amount of merit, even if you look at the spiritual sages, right? Just yesterday we were talking about Sri Ramakrishna. Like, these people have nothing. Today is Easter. Jesus had nothing. There's no pocket big enough to contain the magnitude of spiritual capital that is there for our taking. There is no pocket made big enough for that. All you can do is let it flow. And the more you let flow, the more flows through you. It's very opposite of how we have designed the world, which is through accumulation. Accumulation is, hey, tit for tat. And when you do tit for tat, you tend to narrow. And the way we tend to do this is by putting price tags on everything. This is the cover of Economist magazine. It says, all these things, sharing economy. Things that we used to just give to each other for the love of it, now they have a price tag. And then they say, well, this price tags work pretty well. Can we put price tags on other things? Like what? So, here you see that your dog would be $5 a walk. You look at that and you say, okay, well, $5 a walk, maybe my dog wasn't doing anything, maybe that's good. But then you go a little farther and you say, I don't know how to motivate kids to go to school. Can we pay them to go to school? And the cover of Time magazine tells us that yes, actually, there's a lot of research that shows that it works. And then you can go a little step further and say, I can't motivate them to do homework. So should I pay them to do homework? Yes, research shows you can do that. I can't motivate them to eat their vegetables. Should I pay them to do that? Well, yes, research shows they will eat more veggies if you pay them. And we kind of chuckle, and a bunch of young people look at this and say, let's make this efficient. Can we have a startup that creates an app that makes it easy for us to pay kids to do this stuff? And yes, there are apps to do this. And you look at this and you're like, it's a little funny, and yet it's a little troubling. Because it's troubling because as soon as you start to put price tags on everything, you start to centralize everything. And when you centralize everything, there's a kind of sameness that comes to it. And that sameness is very troubling. You ask young people, here's one of many examples. This is the entire ticket concert industry in the United States, governed by 80% by one company. All the music songs, as you see, every song you love, like a huge percentage of the top 40 songs, are written by the same two Scandinavian men. So we tend to look at it and we're like, oh, so many songs, so many choices. Oh my God, I have my iPhone, your iGadget, latest iGadget of the year. And you're like, wow, I can choose, but what are you really choosing? Is there really a choice underneath it, or are we starting to get to be part of the same monoculture? And I think what happens when everything, the metaphor that I really like is this metaphor of a vase, because when we take a vase and we split it up into so many micro parts in the name of efficiency, we say to make things better, to make things stronger, let's split this up. And as you split it up, you have a certain kind of logic, but then at some point you say, hey, actually, all these micro parts, they're not quite the same as the whole. Can we have the vase back? Much harder to put the vase back than to actually split it up into all these micro parts. So we take these things that are whole, we turn them into micro transactions, and then we say, oh wait, there was a lot of flow with the vase, can we have the vase back? And we cannot have the vase back. And this creates a lot of suffering in the world. No one is happy. You see, we have GDP, but we don't really have a deep sense of happiness and well-being. Everyone knows this. People who study this stuff, and I have been with so many of the world's leaders around this. Everyone knows we're not happy as a culture. We can be way happier, but we've created this issue of serious fragmentation. And this fragmentation happens because we've created this monoculture. And the monoculture is happening because we have got caught in this mindset of accumulation, which is powered by transaction. And so to upend this whole thing is to tap into flow. One more example. This is a funny example. This guy is a photographer. He stands outside, like Naren. Naren's a photographer too. And so he stands outside a shopping mall, a busy area all over the world. And he says, I'm going to take photographs for 2 hours. And then I'm just going to show you what I see. So he looks out and he sees, oh, it's a lot of same people wearing the same clothes, right? So he says, this can't be. Let's go look elsewhere in the world. And this is in Amsterdam. Oh, wait a second. They all think they're kind of buying their own, style, and they're buying their own clothes, but they're all looking pretty similar. This is in Rotterdam. This is, again, on a cold day in Amsterdam. And then he started going all around the world, and this is in Shanghai. Let's see, New York, of course. No series is complete unless you put New York in there, right? And sure enough, you expect that on a New York. And then he says, well, what happens on a hot day? Well, even on a hot day, they're all looking identical. But we have this illusion of choice. We have this illusion of, oh my God, I'm choosing. I have money. I am now going to go to the store. I'm going to buy. But underneath it, we're all part of this serious monoculture. And that's not helping us. So transactions ultimately is what leads us to this very sameness, to this monoculture field. Think of all the different sages and saints that have existed. If Kabir did not say the same thing that Ramakrishna Paramahansa did, that Jesus Christ did, everyone is offering in their own different ways. And so what we need to do is have a rich, thriving polyculture world. If we want to create this flow, which is our resident state, that we all know from meditation, if we want to align that with the outside, with each other and the systems that we create, we have to think much more in a polyculture way. Right? And relationships help us get there. So I want to talk today about, there's no clock, so I'm just going to go inshallah on this. Okay. I want to talk about 3 stages of flow. And if I go over, Naren, you can like pull your ear or something, like baseball. Yeah. But yeah, I'll share a little bit, and then we have an elder amongst us whom I've invited to sing a beautiful song to close it out, and then we'll do some meditation. That's the rough process here. But I want to talk about these 3 stages of flow that I have seen, that I have learned from. I think the first thing is to sense into the flow. All too often, my mom loves to garden. She's in the back. And we grow a whole lot of small things, gardening. But one time I was looking at it and I realized that if you look at a lemon, we have a lemon tree, if you're just focused on the lemon, you'll see the lemon. You'll see the utility of the lemon. You'll think of like the lemonade that you're going to make. But at some point, as you zoom out, you start to realize that, oh, there's much more than a lemon here. There's actually branches. As you zoom out, you say, oh, there's many branches working in concert. As you zoom out even further, you say, wow, there's a trunk, there's a whole ecosystem. It requires nourishment from the sun. It requires nourishment of water. It requires so much for that one lemon to arrive. And then you zoom out even further, and you start to sense into what you cannot see. You understand that there are roots. I cannot see them. I don't use them when I make lemonade, but they're there. And without that, there is no lemonade. And then I can also understand that those roots are connected to the roots of other trees in that ecosystem. And I don't know exactly what is contributing to what, but I know that they're all together. And they're constantly intermingling. And so this flow, initially, it starts to have a very singular sort of perspective that, oh, I'm in flow, I'm feeling great, this is wonderful. But at some point, the boundaries start to blur, and you start to sense into these intermingling roots that are interacting all the time. Where's my parents? My dad is on a meditation retreat, but that's my mom and who's here, in case you didn't see her face. Now you're up on the screen. My mom's like, Nipun, what are you doing? They have been doing an amazing experiment where I have learned to sense into the flow. for the past 21 years at our home in Santa Clara. They've been hosting these Awaken Circles. So people come, they sit in silence for an hour. No teacher, no technique, no agenda, just silence. It's a simple middle-class family room. Move the furnitures out to the side, people sit. And then in the second hour, there's a circle of sharing. You share your aha moment of the week, you share your aha moment of the week, and then we go around and we listen to each other. Very simple. And then in the third hour, she says, we started way back when I had hair. So it was like my mom's looking at me saying, hey, Nipun, I have to feed you anyways, so whoever else comes, I'll feed them. And she's kept it up for 21 years. She's probably fed 50,000 people in our own home. But what you see in a circle is that this is a shoe rack outside our home every Wednesday. What you see in a circle is you start to sense into this flow. Is you realize that it's not just 50, 60 people. It's not just the notes, it's also the gap in between the notes. It's not just the lemons, right? It takes a lot to go from the lemons to see the whole roots. And it takes a lot to look at people, to just go around and realize that it's not just people that are delivering content for me. I am not the center of the show. I like this, I don't like this, this was worth it. Okay, I spent an hour, what did I learn? What are my takeaways? What am I gonna go home and write about? What will I tweet about? All these things that we go on, it's like the center of that show is me. But as we let go of that me, you realize that maybe your job is just to hold a certain space so that someone else can say something, and that something may touch someone over there, and that may touch someone over there, and that may create some other ripple effect. And I don't need to be I don't need to be the center of it. And as soon as that realization dawns on you, it's almost in the most oddest way, you risk your significance. And by risking that significance, you actually might end up being an instrument for something significant. And I've seen this so many times where we're just holding space in the humblest of ways. You go in and you tell my mom thank you, as thousands of people have, and she'll say, no, thank you for the opportunity to be of service. There was a fellow who was in a circle one time, and when it was his time to speak, he gets the mic, and he's just in tears. He says, this is the first time in my life that you have 50 people that are listening to me without cutting me off. Because we don't know how to listen without judgment. I don't want anything from you. I'm just holding you as a brother, as a sister. And when we do that, and when we do that collectively, you start to really sense into a very different kind of flow. But you can only do that if you zoom out from the fixation on the lemon to much farther back. To not even fixating with your sight. You may not see the roots, you have to sense into the roots. You may not even feel it with your senses at some point to be very accurate, but we start to really tap into this, and this becomes very powerful. And so there are circles like this all over the place. And this is my favorite sort of example that I love to share. I usually find one way or another to sneak this slide into every presentation. And this is this idea of network theory. And I always find it mind-boggling that when you read the poetry of mystics, they're always telling us that, oh my God, in front, begin where you are. This is the gateway to infinity. This very moment, it's right here. If we're not freezing this frame with our own desires, it's actually right here. But what is right here? So if you look at it from a very mundane way, network theory, right? If you had a room full of 50 people, just this front portion, and you had told them, okay, how many connections are possible? If there's, let's say, one of me, and there's 50 of you, you would realize that this would lead to 50 connections. But then if you go in and you say, hey, what if all 50 of those people connect to each other? How many connections would you have? You would have 1,225 connections. This is called a one-to-one network, right? Metcalfe's law. And then, I think what really boggles my mind is if you allowed a group-forming network, if you allowed many people to create groups of many different sizes in just the group of 50, you would have 100 million trillion connections. This is just math. This is just with 50 entities. And in reality, in this very moment, in this very room, we have trillions and trillions and trillions of connections that are possible. Not just with each other as physical forms, but in so many different ways. And so the mystics are always telling us, oh my goodness, infinity is right in front of you. But we are so enamored by our finite self that we want to retract into that. But this invitation is to sense into the flow and say, wow, right here, can I make myself open to seeing that? So for me, the first stage is to really open ourselves so we can sense into the flow. Right? The second stage is to embrace the flow. You know, this is a surfer. And the significant thing about a surfer, if you've talked with any surfer, they'll tell you that if a surfer tries to dominate the wave, you're in trouble. Your job is the huge thing, as you start to embrace the flow, the huge shift internally that happens is that we stop identifying ourselves as a wave. Rather than I am a wave in this ocean, you actually are the ocean in which the wave is arising and passing. That is a huge shift. A surfer has to adjust to the wave. You can't say, oh, I'm going to dominate this wave. No, wrong, retry. Please, can you send me a proper wave again? You know, no, it doesn't work like that. And yet this is how we all engage with life. We tend to say, oh, no, that didn't work out, so let me use all my power and might to try to control the wave that's coming in so that I can show that I'm a master of it. That is not actually a master of it. That is actually somebody who's a slave to it. And so how do we learn to embrace the wave? How do we learn to not just look at a star, but to identify ourselves as the sky? How do we learn to not just look at the lemon, but identify with the field? Not just the wave, identify with the ocean. And I think the big shift that starts to come is that when you see all of this, what a good surfer will tell you is that you don't try to control and dominate. You actually try to nudge in a very small way. But your nudge is effective because you're aware of all the different intricate relationships. It's like the domino effect, right? You do a small little nudge and it creates this giant ripple effect. Just a few days ago, a friend of ours was sharing this beautiful metaphor. He's a martial artist, and at one point, he was having a tough time beating, one of his opponents was someone very big. So his teacher took him out and he says, take this stone. Teaching moment, right? So he took him out. He says, take this stone, throw it as far as you can. So he chucks it. Then he says, now here's a leaf. Use all your might, throw it as far as you can. Leaf falls here. The problem is that we look at the world as a stone. Because our awareness is so gross, That we tend to say, oh yeah, the more power I have, the more I can influence this outcome, more I can influence this stone, but actually the world is more like a leaf. And if it is truly like a leaf, then the power is not how much will you have, it's not how many resources you have, it's actually your awareness of what all is going on and your gentleness with which you nudge. Because it will create this giant domino effect. Most of you might have heard of Karma Kitchen. Oh, there's a clock. I see the clock. We got plenty of time, we're good. Most of you have heard of Karma Kitchen. How many of you have heard of Karma Kitchen? Yeah? Oh, that's great. For those of you that haven't, it's a restaurant, it's a pop-up restaurant, so we run this experiment. You walk into this restaurant, this is actually on one of those Karma Kitchen days, and you have a meal like any other restaurant, except at the end of the meal, your check will read 0. Your check is 0 because someone before you has paid for you, and you have a chance to pay forward for people after you, whatever you want. And most people say, no, people are selfish, this can't work, all this stuff, right? So we went through that. This is now in 23 countries, and Harvard came to study us, and they were like, we can't believe this, economics doesn't work like this. And we were like, yes, if Harvard can't understand it, we're in good shape. And then UC Berkeley ended up creating this seminal paper, and the title of it was Paying More When Paying for Others, that actually we respond to generosity with greater generosity. But what happens in a place like this, I want to give you an example of nudging, of how when people tap into that flow and it starts to create a collective flow, what does it mean to hold that collective flow? That's an act of kindness. Thank you. Of course. I have 3. So this guy, I'll tell you a story, 10, 12, all right. So all these people come in from the streets. You can imagine a place like this, right? Everybody believes that, oh, this is all nice, all of you meditator types, you believe in love and compassion and kindness, but come to the streets, people are not like that. And so we said, well, if they're not, then we will shut down the restaurant. But let us try. And if we fail, and on my epitaph, if it reads, here died a man who was recklessly generous, it's okay with me. So we would try these experiments, and people would walk in. And of course, so many people, they just walk in and they would be completely moved to tears, because they were like, wow, to even attempt this experiment already gives them so much hope. So people come in and all kinds of stories happen. So one time this guy walks in, he's very confused, his first time. It's a table of 6. I was volunteering there was another guy. And he kind of looks at everybody and he's like, wow, everyone is so happy, right? Because it's all volunteer run. Everyone is just gifting their labor, and everyone is trusted to tap into that space of love, and it creates a collective vibe every single time. And so this guy's like, yeah, everyone's so happy. I'm not really, he's trying to figure out some angle, what's going on? Nothing, he wasn't there. Then he looks at the server, and he says, this is before he was even ordered the food. He says, oh, that's a really nice shirt. And the guy says, thank you. Yeah, this is a shirt that all volunteers get. And he says, where can I buy one? He says, I don't think you can buy one. But if you volunteer, you might get one, down the road. And so they had this conversation, and he went on. A little bit later, they ordered food and all, and the server, in this kind of a space, we're all taught, our whole purpose is to make people's days with generosity, right? So the server comes back, and he has this idea. I was in the back, he asked me, before he even does this, he says, Nipun, do you have an extra shirt? And I said, no, I don't. It's a kind of odd thing to ask for, right? Do you have an extra shirt? So I said, I don't. But and then he managed to find somebody else's T-shirt or something that he put on. He took out his shirt. And he goes to this guy on the table, and he says, sir, I know you don't know me, but at Karma Kitchen we try to make people's days with acts of radical generosity, and so I just thought that since you like the shirt and there's no other place to buy it, this is for you. And he put a little note on it. It says, please laundry before using, And the guy, can you imagine the first time you're walking in, you're already confused about this whole idea, and the guy has just taken, the waiter has just taken the shirt off his back to give it to you. So this guy is like processing, food hasn't arrived, slowly it starts arriving. He calls the waiter again. He says, hey, I've been thinking, you guys are really doing a good thing. It just kind of brings smiles to your face. There's just this kind of happy energy here. I wanted to contribute something. I know at the end of the meal I pay forward and all, but I work at eBay and I get these gift cards, and I just wanted to give these gift cards to you guys. It's two $50 gift cards. So the waiter looks at it and he's like, wow, I should have given him 2 t-shirts maybe, So he gets these gift cards. Now, he doesn't know what to do. This is not part of the payment process. So he comes to me. He's like, hey, I said, who's it for? He says, for Karma Kitchen. I said, who's Karma Kitchen? And he says, well, I guess it's all of us. And so I said, why don't you give it to somebody in the crowd? He's like, okay. Goes back to the table, tells the guy, he says, thank you for your generosity. And Karma Kitchen really appreciates it, but Karma Kitchen is actually all of us. And so why don't you just give it to a random table? And at this point, the guy loses it, right? Like, he's like, dude, I'm trying to give you $100, and you're like telling me that you don't even want the $100? Like, who are you people? So he says, look, I'm a little on the shy side. I don't feel comfortable going to other people, but you do what you want to do with it. And so this guy then chooses 2 tables. And on one of the tables, there was a little kid that had come for the first time with his piggy bank, and mom wanted to show him the power of paying it forward. And so they hadn't even ordered, and this guy goes up and says, ma'am, someone came here for the first time in this restaurant just an hour or so ago, and his cup of gratitude was overflowing, and he offered this to Karma Kitchen, and we're all Karma Kitchen, and so this is for you to pay forward and take out into the world. And the woman's like, what is this? She says, it's a $50 gift card. And she's like, I haven't even ordered, like, I'm getting free money? What's going on? And watching this, and the same thing happened on the other table, watching this guy is turning red, pink, and purple, right? And he's just watching this, and he's realizing, wow, such a huge ripple effect. And it wasn't really even about the money, right? It's about the love that was being spread around from one to another, to a third, to a fourth. All it took was a nudge. All it took was someone saying, hey, I'm just going to take this shirt off, and not shirt off, I'm just going to offer you what I have in this moment. That small nudge created this massive ripple effect. And when you hold a place like that, when you hold a flow like that, you realize that the real thing was happening. You're just holding the spot. You're just riding the wave. You're not controlling the wave. And as you start to do that, all kinds of new possibilities start to open themselves up in front of you. It's very different than you going out and saying, I'm going to create change. I'm going to go and start this project. Actually, you're just supporting something that had begun far before you. You are just in service to that emergence. It becomes a very powerful way to be and to create projects and change in the world. And the last stage is trusting in the flow. Once you sense into the flow, then you embrace the flow. You said, hey, I'm going to ride the waves. This doesn't need to be my show. I don't need to be in control. I don't need to be the boss. If somebody says, what's your 5-year plan? I said, I don't know, because it's not my wave. Like, just be upfront and say, I'm not in charge. I don't know. Right? Usually when people say that, you're like, oh, that's so wishy-washy. Like, you should be certain. You should have a very clear idea. But then you don't optimize for flow. So I think once you get past that, then you get to this idea of just trusting the flow. Trusting the flow in the sense that, heartfulness meditation. That's trusting the flow too. Trusting the flow in the sense that when you have connection, initially you say, okay, we are connected. And then after a while you say, wow, we have so much synergy. You know, imagine if you put your brain together and my brain together, your resources and your talents and my talents, we could do so much together. But that's still intermediate. The real stuff that the mystics talk about is just emergence. Even beyond synergy. Synergy still has the doer as a part of the orchestration. This is just pure emergence. Something happened. I had no idea who did it. I have no idea what made it happen. I'm just flowing with it. And that's all I want to do. And if you ask me, well, what's the strategy? What's the vision? What's the 5-year plan? Then a person who really trusts the flow will say, brother, that's a good question, but can we ask that later? Right now, can we just practice loving each other? Because when you're loving each other, that question doesn't arise, because you're so deeply in the present moment. So this, I'll give you an example of this. So these are some friends of mine. I met them, I went to a conference of people who were all differently abled. So people who were, autistic, people who were blind, people who had cerebral palsy, 1,000 of them. And a lot of them, and MC was also blind, it was amazing. And a lot of them, the message that they're given is that you have been discriminated against. Why don't you suffer like me and get a job and do all those things, and then we'll see what can be done about happiness. And so I went up and I said, that may be a good thing to do. Great, let's all get jobs and do that and be a part of the market. But I'm here to say that I'd like to practice giving with you. And they ate it up. They came up. People who didn't have the same kind of physical faculties that you or I might have, he said, hey, I want to practice acts of kindness on the street. So what if I'm shaking? So what if I'm stuttering? So what if I can't see everyone's physical face? I still want to love. I want to sit in an awakened circle. I want to host a karma kitchen. And they did in Nepal. All differently abled folks. And so we had this really powerful setting. And then at the end of it, for about a year, they did all kinds of different experiments. Then we said, what we should do is we should have everybody come together and have a retreat for 3 days. So we did. We've done this a couple of times. They say this is something they look forward to their whole life, their whole year, because it's 3 days just for them. And they talk about how they can give. And I remember this moment of really just trusting the flow that happened. This was maybe a little over a year ago in Hyderabad at the J. Krishnamurti Center, incidentally. And we were all there. And this was day 2 of a 3-day retreat. And it was time to take a coffee break, not like a ragi break. They had this drink that we were all going to have, a better version of coffee. And so we were going to go and take this break. And they said, only one catch. We're all going to blindfold ourselves. Okay, see you in 15 minutes. Right. So all of a sudden, everyone, now imagine if we did this, right? Like here. And I said, yeah, we're going to take a 15-minute break and we're all going to come back. And you're used to a certain pattern. And now we're all blindfolded. And now we have to go. And, the first thought you would have is, oh my God, how am I going to write? People start stumbling, doing all this stuff. How are you going to go there, come back, drink, put your glass away, figure a way out, come back in your seat? How do you all these things buzzing. But in this circle, We had people in a wheelchair. We had people with a couple of them with Down syndrome. We had, one person who was deaf. 2 people who were mute. In that circle, these guys, spontaneously, without any prodding, in fact, I hadn't even imagined it, they said, the one woman, particularly a blind woman, this young woman, and she kind of yells out, "Hey guys, I'm blind, so I know how to do this. I got this." Okay, and we were like, "Okay, what do you got?" And even me included, I was like, "Okay, how is this where are we gonna go? I have no idea. I had not practiced being blind, right? So what am I gonna do?" She says, "Well, I know exactly what we gotta do, but I think what we should do before we figure out the path is we should all lock hands, arm in arm. And as soon as we come and fall into the circle formation, we can all guide each other. Otherwise, we're all going to take long paths and get hurt and fall down and go there and then come back, and it'll never happen in 15 minutes. But this way, we can all be connected. And as we're connected, we'll help each other." And she got everyone into this, and everyone's like, yes, okay, let's do this. And then someone says, "Oh, wait a second, what about people in the wheelchair?" It's like, "Okay, are you there? Okay, I'm going to be behind the wheelchair. Okay." And there were a couple blind people, and they had special skills, so they were like, I can do hold hand and I can push the wheelchair. And they were going back and forth, and it was the most amazing thing. There was little stairs that we wouldn't have been able to figure out, and those who couldn't see, they were like, step, 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 step. And everybody, it would ricochet all the way back. Step, 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 step. And we stepped. And we went. And we got the drink. And we came back with time to spare. And I wonder about that cooperation gene. A lot of science tells us that we are wired to be like this. We don't need to teach kids to be loving. We need to teach them how to be greedy. And then we forget. But it's actually in our inheritance of being human. This is our endowment, that we are connected. But we have to trust in that. We have to fall into that in a very deep way. And I've just seen this repeatedly, where if you really just let go of even our schemes of trying to get ahead, even our schemes to try to build something up, if we just let all that go, I think we arrive at this idea of just raw emergence. And that raw emergence, if it is uninfiltrated by our egos, will necessarily be loving, will necessarily be cooperative, will necessarily be compassionate. Because that is our true nature. So in summary, I think we sense into the flow, we embrace the flow, and we trust in the flow. And I think as we do that, we move away, far away from accumulation, far away from identifying ourselves with that which we have accumulated. I sometimes wonder, what if bank balances were banks were like parking lots? Right? Parking lot, you don't say, "Oh, you've parked your car here for 3 years? Good, we'll give you a second car free." We reward accumulation in the world today. Instead of, "Oh, well, you've kept it too long, so clearly you don't need it. We'll just keep taking it from you." Imagine if, banks were designed in that way. It would be a very different world. So how do we start to look deeply? Embrace this, but as we embrace this, how do we start to look deeply at the world that we inhabit and see the places where there's a sense of accumulation and try to turn it towards flow? Eventually. Oh, that's a cute photo. I just want to throw it in there. I would tell you a story, but we're out of time here. So I think if we go from transaction to deep relationships, okay, I think this is the secret. Then we create a field of trust. Right? So as we start flowing, as we start giving, like that woman gave me a little cup of tea last night, you create these, it's no longer transaction, you create these deep relationships. That web of deep relationships creates trust. And that trust, in that field of trust, we ultimately get to transformation. But transformation is not something that can be manufactured. It has to grow organically as the field is ripe. We tend to look at everything as like a recipe, right? This is the recipe, you apply this, and then all of a sudden you get here. But actually, with transformation, it grows when the time is ripe. But that field has to be ripe. The field of trust has to be there, and the field of trust is going to be there if we have those relationships, and those relationships are going to be there if we've tapped into this flow of love. So I'll end with this. These are two of my, two of our interns from way back in the days. They started this thing called a 21-day challenge. They actually did a 30-day challenge back in their days. And they said, every day we're going to do one extra act of kindness. And they just went about, and it sounds so simple, it sounds so small. And they're like, one extra act? That sounds easy, right? Hold open a door, what's the big deal? Turns out that as you do this, you build these kindness muscles inside you. And as you build these kindness muscles, it's like your brain gets rewired and you have access to these new neural pathways. And once you have walked it intentionally, then even in those moments of stress, you're like, oh, I can approach this situation with kindness because I have a road to it in my mind. And so we started to have all our interns do these acts of kindness. Oh, this really works. And this is another one of our interns, and she really moved me when she wrote this story. She also did it for 30 days, and on day 22, she wrote, and every day you would do an act, and then you would tell us the story. And so she would tell us these stories, and she really moved me one time, where she says that today, I decided to do an act of kindness for myself. Because initially you think of all the ideas you can do, and then your brain really starts to create new neural pathways. And so we said, what did you do? And she says, well, I decided, so initially when she says, I decided to be kind to myself, I thought, okay, maybe she got ice cream for herself, or I don't know, it's all fair game, right? So I wasn't sure. And she says, well, you know, when I was 9, I was sitting in the back seat, my mom and dad were in the front, our car got into an accident, and my mom passed away. And to this day, I have never been able to visit her funeral site by myself. And today, I decided that I'm going to do an act of kindness for myself, and I'm going to go visit my mom. And visit that part of myself that I was not capable of holding until these 21 days of kindness. We didn't even know. We weren't trying to transform her. We weren't trying to say, oh, you're going to come in through this door, and when you leave, you're going to be a whole different person. Man, that is the ocean's job. No wave can do that. Any wave that is arrogant enough to say, I'm going to change you, ooh, one has to be careful about that. But this woman, this young woman, figured out where she needed to go. She built this kindness muscle. And with this access resources, she knew in her own consciousness where that needed to flow. And not only where that needed to flow, she needed to know, she knew exactly the right way to approach that context. So we just have to learn to trust in that. So I hope all of us can be kind. And through that kindness, we learn to tap into the flow. And through that flow, we see, not only do we sense into it, we learn to embrace it, but we trust that that flow will go where it needs to go within our consciousness, within the consciousness of those around us, within the consciousness of the systems that we inhabit. And it all starts with us practicing. So I have brought a few kindness diaries for 21 days. Every day there's a different act on the left side, and on the right side you write down your reflection at the end of the day. It's just between you and yourself. But it's a very powerful practice. So I encourage you to do that. It's somewhere. You can find it. And ultimately, I think I would just say, this is the last image here. This is the image of a living bridge. This is a bridge where they try to put these cement bridges. This is in Meghalaya. Some of you might have heard of this. But this is a bridge, this is a place where two banks, they try to put these cement bridges, they all fell down. The only bridge that stays is this living bridge. The reason why this is a living bridge is because these are all roots. And it takes generations and generations and generations. Every generation knows that I'm going to take this small little root, connect it with the one for the next generation. And the next generation takes that small little root, connects it to the next one, connects it to the next one. They are all doing their little part. And as we do our small little part, you realize that you're able to birth something with tremendous resiliency. Hundreds of people can stand on this thing. Thousands of people walk on this thing every single day. There's so many such bridges. And it's alive. It's living. It's connected with the diverse ecosystem. And I think it's just a great metaphor of how we can be in engagement with the flow. So thank you very much for your kind attention and interest. To close, I want to invite Arun Dada to, we have a very special Gandhian amongst us. How many of you have heard of Vinoba Bhave by any chance? Oh, amazing. Arun Dada, badai Vinoba Bhave naam samblish. So many times, unfortunately, many people in the world have not. But those of you that know, he was Gandhi's successor in India. Just a remarkable human being, has done some unprecedented feats. Arun Dada spent from his age of 20 till Vinoba's passing away for many decades was with Vinoba. He's a legend in terms of all that he has done. He has never, talk about accumulation. This man has, like I think I quoted him somewhere, he says he has 2 pairs of clothes, and he says, no, I have 3. 3 pairs of clothes, no bank account, never sold his labor in his life, 86 years old, had 2 kids, still has 2 kids. His wife of 57 years passed away just a couple of years ago. Just an incredible human being. And you say, wow, how, talk about flow. And here's a guy who says, I refuse to accumulate. And he doesn't have anything. And yet, he's able to create so much change in the world. He's able to create so much transformation in himself and those around him. So it's a real honor. I could tell you a lot about him, but I just wanted to invite him to sing a small little prayer. This is a prayer that I heard for the first time when I met him. And it totally moved me to tears. I'll give you a brief summary and then invite him to speak. This is a French mystic, Fenelon. And Fenelon has got this boon. God has arrived at his doorstep and says, what do you want, my son? And what would you ask for? If you were given a boon, ask for anything, what would you ask for? And so in this poem that Arun Dada will sing, and this is so much him, this is who his spirit is, Fenelon starts by saying, God, I don't know what to ask, but I am open. And then he goes a little farther on his journey and he says, actually, God, I'm not just open, I am willing to accept anything that comes my way. Whether it is pain or pleasure, I'm willing to embrace it all. because this is all your offering to me. And then at the end, he says, but actually, God, now that I think about it, I want to melt in you. So why don't you just come in me and ask yourself? Isn't that amazing? Give it up for Arun Dada.
मांगू छूते हूँ जानो न मालिक आप होते आप जैसे जे मांगू छूते हूँ जानो न मालिक आप होते आप जैसे जे मागता मुने न आवडे काही मागता मुने न आवडे काही तुझ जाणी करी जुग तू दे जे तुझ जाणी करी जुग तू मन माने नहीं मांगता मालिक मन माने नहीं मांगता मालिक मरने माथड़े वावजे काटा केम करे बड़े चिंतु हइये वरसावजे तू चंदन छाटा केम करे बड़े चिंतु हइये वरसावजे तू चंदन छाटा જેવી છે તેવી આ જાતને માલિક જેવી છે તેવી આ જાતને માલિક સાવ ખુલ્લા દિલે સામને રાખું જેવી છે તેવી આ જાતને માલિક સાવ ખુલ્લા દિલે સામને રાખું ભાવે તે ફેંકજે દિન દયાળુ મીઠું કે કાળું કા શોભાખું भावे ते फेंकजे दिन दयालु मीठू के काड़ू काई न भाखू मूंगा मूंगा तारे चरणे मालिक होशे होशे कुर्बान छे काया मूंगा मूंगा तारे चरणे मालिक होशे होशे कुर्बान छे काया ओगળી પીગળી जाऊं तारामा ओगળી પીગળી जाऊं तारामा प्राण रहे नहीं लेश पर आया ओगળી પીગળી जाऊं तारामा प्राण रहे नहीं लेश पर आया मागता मुले न आवड़े काई શીખવી દેશું માગું સારું માગતા મુને ન આવડે કાંઈ શીખવી દેશું માગું સારું આદકુએથી તો મુજમાં બેસી આદકુએથી તો મુજમાં બેસી તું જ માગી લે ગમતું તારું આદકુએથી તો મુજમાં બેસી તું જ માગી લે ગમતું તારું.
Shall we do a moment of silence, and then I'll invite Naren to conclude our morning. So just a minute of silence in the spirit of gratitude that so many blessings have brought so many amazing people here. I also hope you get a chance to say your hellos to Arun Dada. He's here for lunch, so just a moment of silence.